The desert
Here, this
sun
is
was
for
dying
you.
over Williams,
Whoa.
Arizona,
Hey,
bleeding
that's
out
real.
across the western sky in shades of burnt copper and bruised violet. It was the kind of sunset that made the whole world look like it was on fire, the kind that turned the old Route 66 into a ribbon of molten gold stretching through a town that time had mostly forgotten. Vintage motels with their neon signs stood like sentinels along the highway, their vacancy lights already flickering to life. Diners with chrome trim and checkered floors held on to their dignity, the way old soldiers hold on to their medals with quiet pride and the stubborn refusal to surrender to a world that had moved on without them. The air still carried the day's heat trapped between the asphalt and the endless sky. Dust devils spun lazy circles across empty parking lots, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle cut through the stillness like a long, mournful cry. Two motorcycles rumbled into the gravel lot of Rosie's Diner, their engines announcing their arrival like thunder rolling across the desert floor. Chrome caught the last of the daylight and threw it back in sharp, defiant flashes. The bikes were Harley-Davidsons, both of them, the kind of machines that weren't just transportation, but declarations of intent. They said something about the men who rode them, something about freedom and defiance, and the refusal to live a life that fit neatly into someone else's expectations. The engines cut off simultaneously, and the silence that followed felt almost sacred. Nothing remained but the distant hum of interstate traffic and the electric buzz of Rosie's neon sign, a pink and blue relic that had been promising hot coffee and cold power since 1962. Colt Hargrove swung his leg over his bike and stood slowly, his leather vest creaking as he stretched the tension from his lower back. At 53, these long rides extracted a toll they never used to. His body kept a ledger of every mile, every year, every mistake, and the balance was coming due. His beard had gone mostly gray, shot through with remnants of the dark brown it used to be, and road dust had settled into its coarse fibers like snow on iron wool. His arms told stories in ink-faded tattoos that chronicled a younger man's convictions and a younger man's recklessness. An eagle clutching a rifle across his right forearm, dog tags inked permanently into his left bicep, names and dates that meant everything to him and nothing to anyone else. "My back is about to file a formal complaint," Colt muttered, pulling off his riding gloves and stuffing them into his back pocket. Vaughn Oakes dismounted his own bike with considerably more ease, though he looked every bit as road-worn as his companion. At 43, he still moved with the fluid economy of a man who kept himself sharp, but the lines around his eyes and the careful way he rolled his shoulders told a different story. His dark skin glistened with the day's sweat, and he pulled a faded bandana from his pocket to wipe his forehead before tucking it away again. The leather cut he wore bore patches from motorcycle clubs across 3 states, each one a chapter, in a life that had been lived almost entirely on 2 wheels and open highway. "That is what happens when you ride like you are still running. Convoy escort through Fallujah," Vaughn said with a grin that showed the gap between his front teeth. Colt grunted. Some habits die hard. Some habits should die, period. They had been riding together for nearly 15 years, ever since they had crossed paths at a veteran support group in Flagstaff. The group met every Thursday evening in the basement of a Methodist church that smelled like old hymnals and industrial coffee. Colt had done 2 tours in Iraq, the second one ending with shrapnel in his left knee and a Purple Heart he kept in a sock drawer because looking at it made him feel like a fraud. Vaughn had served in Afghanistan 3 deployments that had left him with a Bronze Star, a case of PTSD that ambushed him in his sleep, and the unshakable conviction that the man who came home was not the same man who had left. They had found each other in that church basement the way survivors find each other, not through words, but through recognition. The way Colt's eyes swept every room he entered, cataloging exits. The way Vaughn sat with his back to the wall, never the door. The way neither of them could tolerate silence that lasted too long or crowds that pressed too close. They understood each other in a language that had no vocabulary, only instinct. The road had become their therapy, 2 wheels open sky, and the roar of engines that drowned out the noise inside their heads. They rode not because they were going somewhere, but because standing still felt like drowning. And over 15 years of shared highway, their friendship had been forged into something harder than steel and more reliable than anything either of them had found in the civilian world. Inside Rosie's Diner, the air conditioning hit them like a wall of mercy. The place was a time capsule in the best possible way. Red vinyl booths that had been reupholstered twice but still bore the ghost impressions of decades of travelers. A black and white checkered floor scuffed by a million boots and sneakers. A jukebox in the corner that someone had loaded with Patsy Cline and Johnny Cash, and right now Patsy was singing about falling to pieces, her voice floating through the diner like smoke from a candle. A handful of truckers occupied the counter, nursing coffee and wedges of pie that looked like they had been cut with a protractor. A couple in their 70s shared a milkshake in a booth near the door, two straws, their wrinkled hands intertwined on the table. The normalcy of the scene was almost painful in its simplicity. The waitress was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes that had seen too much and tired feet that had walked too far. She looked up from wiping down a booth and assessed the two bikers with the practiced eye of someone who had been sizing up strangers for 40 years. "Sit anywhere, gentlemen," she called out, her voice carrying the warm rasp of decades on the late shift. "Menu is on the table. Coffee is fresh." Colt and Vaughn chose a booth near the window, an old habit that had nothing to do with the view and everything to do with sightlines. From here, they could see their bikes in the parking lot, the front door, and most of the dining room. It was instinct more than necessity. These days they rode for peace, not trouble. But the training never really left. It lived in the muscles, in the peripheral vision, in the way they automatically positioned themselves so that no one could approach without being seen. The waitress appeared with menus and glasses of water that sweated in the warm air. "What will it be?" "Coffee black, and whatever your dinner special is," Colt said. "Make that two," Vaughn added. As the waitress walked away, Colt saw her. A little girl, sitting alone in a booth near the back of the diner, half hidden by the tall vinyl seat back. She could not have been more than 8 or 9 years old. Dark hair pulled back into a ponytail that was coming loose, strands falling across her face. Her clothes were worn but clean, a faded purple t-shirt with a small hole near the collar, and jeans with patches ironed carefully onto both knees. Someone who loved her was paying attention, even if the budget was tight. What caught Colt's eye was not just that she was alone, though that alone was enough to trigger every protective instinct he had. It was the way she sat. Her posture was rigid with a tension no child should carry. Her small hands clutched something in her lap, and every few seconds her eyes darted to the front door, with a hope so desperate it was almost unbearable to witness. She was waiting for someone, and that someone was not coming. "You see that kid?" Colt asked quietly, his voice dropping below the ambient noise of the diner. Vaughn turned his head, slightly casual, the way you look at something when you do not want to be caught looking. His eyes found the girl and stayed there for a long moment before returning to Colt. "Yeah, been watching her since we walked in." No parent anywhere in sight. They fell into silence as their food arrived. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans glistening with butter. Standard diner fare that tasted like salvation after 8 hours in the saddle. They ate with the quiet efficiency of men who had learned to consume meals quickly in places where lingering meant vulnerability. But even as he chewed, Colt could not stop his eyes from drifting back to the girl's booth. She had not ordered anything except a glass of water. The waitress had checked on her twice, and each time the girl had shaken her head politely and glanced toward the door. And she kept looking at Colt and Vaughn. Not with fear exactly, though there was certainly fear in those eyes. More like assessment, like she was measuring them against some internal standard and trying to decide if they passed. "She is staring at us," Vaughn said, keeping his voice low. "I know. Think we should—" Before Vaughn could finish the thought, the girl made her decision. She slid out of her booth with the determined grace of a child who has run out of options and knows it, and she started walking toward them. Up close, the worry carved into her young face was even more apparent. Her eyes were rimmed with red, the delicate skin beneath them puffy and raw. She had been crying recently. Not the dramatic crying of a child throwing a tantrum, but the quiet, exhausted crying of someone who has been afraid for a very long time and has finally reached the end of their capacity to manage it alone. She stopped at the edge of their table. One small hand gripped a crumpled $10 bill, clutching it the way a drowning person clutches a rope. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and it trembled like a candle flame in a draft. "Are you nice people?" The question hit Colt somewhere beneath his ribs, in a place he had spent years trying to armor. He glanced at Vaughn and saw his own reaction mirrored there. In their leather and ink, with their weathered faces and builds that had been shaped by war and hard living, they knew exactly what they looked like. They had seen mothers pull their children closer when they walked past on sidewalks. They had been asked to leave restaurants by managers who assumed their presence was bad for business. They had been followed by security guards in stores, watched by police at traffic stops with a scrutiny that went beyond routine. They were the men people crossed the street to avoid. "We try to be, sweetheart," Vaughn said, and his voice lost every rough edge it normally carried. He sounded in that moment like a completely different man, gentle, present, safe. "Are you okay?" The girl's lower lip trembled. She held out the $10 bill with both hands the way you would present an offering at an altar. The bill was wrinkled and soft with handling, as if it had been smoothed and folded and smoothed again many times. "This is all I have," she said. "But I need help. My mama did not come home last night. She always comes home." Her voice cracked on the last word, splitting open like dry earth, and the tears she had been holding back broke through. "She left for work yesterday morning, and she always calls me when her shift ends. But she did not call, and she did not come home. Mrs. Hadley next door let me stay over, but she had to go to work at the truck stop this morning, and I walked here because I did not know where else to go, and I called 911, but they said since she is an adult and it has not been 24 hours, they cannot do anything. And they said she probably just went somewhere and forgot to call. But my mama would never do that, never." The words came out in a flood, tumbling over each other faster and faster, until they dissolved into sobs that shook her small frame like a storm shaking a sapling. Vaughn was out of the booth before Colt could move, dropping to one knee, so he was at the girl's eye level. Colt followed his large frame folding awkwardly as his bad knee protested the sudden demand. The two of them knelt there on the checkered floor of Rosie's diner, two scarred and tattooed men crouching beside a crying child, and something in the universe shifted. Some invisible scale that had been out of balance for a very long time began slowly to right itself. "Hey, hey, it is okay," Vaughn said softly. "What is your name?" "Birdie," she managed between hiccups. "Birdie Winslow." "Birdie, that is a beautiful name. I am Vaughn, and this is Colt. And you know what? You did exactly the right thing coming to ask for help. That took real courage." Vaughn's eyes dropped to the $10 bill still clutched in her small hands. "But you keep your money, okay? We do not need it." "But I do not have anything else to give you," Birdie said, confusion mixing with her desperation. She looked at the bill as if it were the last card in her hand, and she could not understand why they would not take it. Colt felt something shift deep in his chest, a door that had been sealed for years, giving way under pressure it could no longer resist. This little girl, terrified and alone, offering two strangers her entire savings because the system that was supposed to protect her had told her to wait, to be patient, to accept that her mother's absence was probably nothing to worry about. She had looked at the world of adults and found it useless, and so she had turned to the only people left, two men who looked like they had crawled out of her worst nightmare because she had nowhere else to go. It reminded Colt of something he had not thought about in years, the reason he had enlisted in the first place. Not patriotism, not adventure, not the college money. It had been simpler than that. He had wanted to protect people who could not protect themselves. Somewhere along the way, between the IED that took his hearing in his left ear and the divorce papers that took his daughter, he had lost that part of himself. This child had just found it again, Birdie, Colt said, and his voice came out gruff but gentle, like gravel wrapped in cloth. "What is your mama's name?" "Norah. Norah Winslow. She is 34 and she has long brown hair, and she drives a blue Honda Civic with a bumper sticker that says nurses do it with care, and there is a scratch on the driver's side door from when she hit a pole in the hospital parking garage, and she was so embarrassed about it." Birdie almost smiled at the memory. Then her face collapsed again. "She is a nurse at the hospital in Flagstaff. Emergency department. She works really hard. She came here from West Virginia when I was little because she said she wanted us to have a fresh start in a place where the mountains touch the sky. She would never just not come home without telling me. Never. Something is wrong. I know something is wrong." Colt stood up and looked at Vaughn. In that single glance, 15 years of shared road, shared silence, shared understanding compressed into a fraction of a second. Everything that needed to be said was said without a word. They were going to help this girl. There was no discussion, no deliberation, no weighing of pros and cons. The decision had been made the moment Birdie held out that $10 bill. "Birdie," Vaughn said, "we are going to help you find your mama, and we are not taking your money. Deal?" Birdie's eyes went wide. The hope that flooded her face was almost too bright to look at, like staring directly into a searchlight. "Really, you promise?" "We promise," Colt said, and he was surprised by how much he meant it. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere he had not accessed in a very long time, and they carried a weight that felt almost physical. But first we need to call some people, and we need to go to your house. Your mama might have left something behind that can help us find her. Notes, messages, anything. Birdie nodded eagerly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Our house is only 3 blocks from here. But can we go there first before calling anyone? Why there first? Because Mom always told me. She said if there is ever an emergency, the first thing you do is get the box from her closet. She made me practice finding it. She said everything important is in that box. Colt and Vaughn exchanged another glance. A mother who had prepared an emergency protocol for her 8-year-old daughter. That was either extraordinary foresight or the behavior of a woman who had been afraid of something for a long time. The waitress appeared concern etched into her lined face. She had been watching the exchange from behind the counter, and now she could not keep her distance any longer. Is everything all right here? She looked at Birdie with recognition. Birdie, honey, where is your mama? You two usually come in together on Fridays. That is what we are trying to figure out, Colt said, standing up slowly, his knees cracking in protest. Her mama did not come home from work yesterday. The waitress pressed her hand to her chest. Oh, Lord. Norah would never. That woman lives for this child. She comes in here every other Friday, the two of them, and Birdie always gets the chocolate milkshake, and Norah always gets the garden salad and then steals Birdie's fries when she thinks no one is looking. Birdie made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She always does that. They paid their bill and walked out into the parking lot where the last light of the day was fading behind the mountains to the west. The temperature was dropping fast the way it does in the desert, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. Birdie looked at the two motorcycles and her eyes went wide with something between terror and fascination. I have never been on a motorcycle before. Colt reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a spare helmet. He always carried an extra. It was a habit from another life, from the years when his daughter Jessa was young enough to ride with him back before the divorce, before the custody hearing, where the judge had looked at his tattoos and his record and his profession and decided that Colt Hargrove was not the kind of man who should be raising a little girl. He had carried the spare helmet for 15 years after that, like a talisman, like a prayer for a second chance that never came. Until now, he shook off the memory and knelt down to help Birdie with the helmet. It was too big for her, but he tightened the chin strap until it was secure. Her small face nearly disappeared inside it, and despite everything, despite the fear and the urgency and the terrible uncertainty of what they were about to find, she looked up at him through the oversized visor with those bright, determined eyes. You are going to sit behind me and hold on tight. Okay? And if you get scared, you just tap my shoulder and I will stop immediately. Yes, sir, Birdie said. In the formality of it, the trust embedded in that small phrase made Colt's throat tighten. He lifted her carefully onto the back of his Harley and felt her small arms wrap around his waist, holding on with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so young. Vaughn mounted his own bike beside them, and together they pulled out of Rosie's parking lot and onto Route 66. The ride was 3 blocks, less than 2 minutes. But Colt drove as if he were carrying glass, taking each turn with exaggerated care, keeping his speed so low the engine barely rumbled. Behind him, he could feel Birdie's heart beating against his back, rapid and strong, like a bird trapped in a cage. Birdie's house was a small, single-story ranch with paint that had once been blue, but had faded to the color of a winter sky. A chain-link fence surrounded a modest yard where the grass was neatly mowed despite the desert's best efforts to turn everything to dust. A garden gnome missing one arm stood guard beside the mailbox, and wind chimes hung from the porch, tinkling softly in the evening breeze, like someone playing a distant piano with one hand. Every inch of the place spoke of tight budgets and careful choices. Every dollar accounted for nothing wasted. But it also spoke of love. Flower pots lined the front steps, their contents wilting slightly from a day without water, but still alive, still trying. A welcome mat that read, "Come in, we are awesome," sat slightly crooked in front of the door. A child's bicycle with training wheels, older and rusted at the joints, leaned against the porch railing. Colt cut his engine, and the silence that followed felt heavy with everything they did not yet know. Birdie scrambled off the bike and pulled off the helmet with both hands. Her hair was wild with static standing up in every direction, but there was a spark in her eyes that had not been there at the diner. Momentum. Purpose. She was doing something, and doing something was better than waiting. That was actually kind of fun, she admitted quietly as she handed the helmet back. Then she caught herself as if feeling guilty for experiencing any positive emotion while her mother was missing. Colt took the helmet and secured it to his bike. Your mama would want you to enjoy things, Birdie, even right now. Especially right now. Birdie looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. This way. She reached under a flower pot beside the door and retrieved a spare key. Mama always keeps one here. She says it is not very safe, but she is afraid I will lose my own key and get locked out. The door swung open and they stepped into a home that told the story of two people who had built a life from scratch and made it beautiful through sheer force of will. The living room was small but immaculately kept. A worn couch covered with a colorful Afghan blanket, a coffee table with medical journals stacked neatly on one corner, and a coloring book open on the other, half-finished crayons scattered like confetti. A small television with rabbit ears, the old-fashioned kind, sat on a stand next to a bookshelf crammed with paperbacks and nursing textbooks. Photographs covered every available surface. Birdie at various ages. School pictures with gap-toothed smiles and lopsided pigtails. A snapshot of Birdie and Norah at the Grand Canyon, both of them squinting into the sun with matching grins. A framed photo of a younger Norah in her nursing school graduation cap and gown, holding infant Birdie in one arm, and her diploma in the other, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and triumph that spoke volumes about the road she had traveled to get there. A simple wooden crucifix hung on the wall next to a calendar marked with Norah's work shifts in neat, careful handwriting. Each shift was color-coded. Blue for day shifts, red for nights, green for the rare days off that were circled with little smiley faces that Birdie had clearly drawn. It is just us, Birdie said, as if reading the thoughts that were passing across Colt's face. It has always been just us. Mama came here from West Virginia when she was pregnant with me. She did not have anything except $200 in a rusted-out station wagon that broke down in Flagstaff, and she said that was God telling her to stop running and start building. She worked as a waitress for 2 years while she went to nursing school at night, and she said some nights she was so tired she would study with her eyes closed and hope the words seeped in through her eyelids. Birdie managed a small smile at that. She was repeating her mother's stories, Colt realized, holding on to them like anchors. Where's your mama's room, Birdie? This way. She led them down a short hallway decorated with more photographs and a handmade growth chart on the wall marked with dates and heights in Nora's handwriting, each entry accompanied by a small notation. Birdie's first day of kindergarten. Lost first tooth. Read entire chapter book by herself. 2 bedrooms and a bathroom branched off the hallway. Birdie's room was clearly the larger of the two, decorated with posters of horses and a bookshelf overflowing with well-worn paperbacks. A stuffed bear with matted fur and one eye slightly askew sat propped against the pillows. Nora's room was smaller, barely enough space for a double bed, a compact dresser, and a closet. The bed was neatly made with a quilt that looked hand-stitched. A single photograph on the nightstand showed Birdie as a baby sleeping in Nora's arms. Your mama gave you the bigger room, Vaughn observed. She said I needed space to grow, Birdie replied softly. She always does stuff like that. Gives me the bigger piece of chicken. Gets up early to make my favorite pancakes even when she worked the night shift. She says sleep is for people who do not have daughters to spoil. Birdie's voice wavered. That is how I know something is wrong. She would never just not come home. Not ever. Not for anything. Colt opened the closet carefully, feeling like an intruder in a space that was not his. Inside hung scrubs in various colors, a few pairs of jeans, some blouses that looked like they were reserved for church, and a single black dress still wrapped in dry cleaning plastic. On the top shelf, behind a stack of folded sweaters, sat a small metal lockbox. That is the box, Birdie said, immediately pointing. That is what Mama told me to get. Do you know where the key is? Birdie went to the dresser, opened the top drawer, and felt around behind the neatly folded socks. Her small hand emerged with a tiny silver key. Colt lifted the box down and set it on the bed. The lock clicked open, and inside they found the architecture of a careful life. Birdie's birth certificate, Nora's nursing license from the state of Arizona, a diploma from the nursing program at Northern Arizona University, a small savings passbook showing a balance of $2,847, Social Security cards for both of them, and a worn photograph of a very young Norah, barely out of her teens, standing in front of a hand-painted sign that read, Welcome to Williams, Arizona. She was visibly pregnant, and her expression was equal parts terrified and resolute. But there was something else, A smaller envelope sealed with the words emergency contacts written on the front in Nora's handwriting. Inside the envelope were 3 names and phone numbers: Jolene Falk's sister Phoenix, Father Brennan, St. Mary's Catholic Church, Edna Hadley, neighbor. And beneath the contact list, a folded letter. Birdie reached for it, then hesitated. She looked at Colt, then at Vaughn, as if asking permission to open something that felt too heavy for her hands. Colt nodded gently. Birdie unfolded the letter and read it slowly. Her lips moved with each word the way children read when they are concentrating hard on getting every syllable right. It says, "Dear Jolene, if you are reading this, something has happened to me. Please take Birdie and keep her safe. I am sorry I waited so long to reach out. I am sorry for all the years of silence between us. Tell Birdie I love her more than every star in the sky, more than all the horses in the world, more than she will ever know. And Jolene, please tell her I did not leave her. I would never leave her. Whatever happened, I fought to come back." Birdie's voice broke. She looked up from the letter with eyes so wide and frightened that Colt had to look away for a moment to compose himself. Why would Mama write that? Why would she write a letter like this? Vaughn knelt beside her. People write things like this just to be prepared, he said, and his voice was steady, even though his hands were not. It does not mean anything bad is going to happen. It is just being responsible. Like keeping a first aid kit in your car. You hope you never need it. But the letter told Colt everything he needed to know. Norah Winslow had been afraid. Not in a general what if something happens way. Afraid in a specific someone might come for me way. She had written this letter because she believed there was a real possibility that she would not come home one day. And she had prepared her daughter for that possibility with the quiet, methodical efficiency of a woman who had spent her whole life preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. "We need to call these people," Colt said, "starting with the priest. Churches keep evening hours." He pulled out his phone and dialed the number for Father Brennan at St. Mary's. Someone answered on the third ring. "St. Mary's Catholic Church. Father Brennan speaking." "Father, my name is Colt Hargrove. I am calling about one of your parishioners, Norah Winslow. When was the last time you saw her?" "Norah. She was at Mass this past Sunday, same as always. She and Birdie sit in the third pew right side." The priest's voice shifted from casual to alert. "Why is something wrong?" "She did not come home from work yesterday. Her daughter Birdie has been alone since this morning. We are trying to find her." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Dear God, Norah would never leave Birdie alone. Never. That woman's entire life revolves around her daughter. She walks that child to school every morning and picks her up every afternoon, rain or shine. I have seen her come to Mass with a 102-degree fever because she promised Birdie they would light a candle together. "Father, did Norah seem troubled recently? Did she mention any problems? Anything at work? Anything in her personal life?" The priest was quiet for a moment. The silence had texture to it. Wait. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more careful. "Norah came to confession about 3 weeks ago. I cannot share what was said. The seal of confession is absolute, but I can tell you within the bounds of what I am permitted to say that she was frightened. Not for herself, for Birdie. She asked me if I knew of any legal resources, anyone who could help with protection, if, and these were her words, if they came after her." Colt's pulse quickened. "Who is they?" She would not say, and I did not press as hard as I should have. She said she just needed to keep her head down and it would blow over. I offered to help, offered to make calls, offered to connect her with people who could protect her. She refused everything. Said the less anyone knew, the safer everyone would be. Father Brennan's voice grew thick with regret. "I should have pushed harder. I should have insisted." "You could not have known, Father. But we need to find her now. If you think of anything else, any detail at all, please call me." Cole gave his number and ended the call. Birdie had been standing close enough to hear everything, and her face had gone pale beneath its natural color. "Mama was scared," she whispered. "Scared of someone." "We do not know that yet for certain," Vaughn began, but Birdie shook her head. "You heard what the father said? She was scared, and she wrote that letter because she knew something might happen." Birdie's jaw set in a line that was startlingly adult. "We have to call the other people on the list, and we have to call the hospital. Someone there might know something." Colt found himself taking orders from an 8-year-old, and what struck him was that her instincts were right. Every one of them. She was thinking clearly, methodically, like someone who had inherited her mother's ability to function under pressure. He dialed Decker Rollins next. Decker was an old Army buddy who had traded his uniform for a sheriff's deputy badge in Coconino County. If anyone could cut through the bureaucratic paralysis of the 24-hour waiting period, it was Decker. The phone rang 3 times. Then a familiar voice, gravel and coffee, and a hint of the Oklahoma panhandle where he had grown up. Colt Hargrove. Either you are in jail or you need a favor. Which is it? Both, maybe, Colt said. Decker, I need your help. He laid out everything. Birdie, Norah, the missing night, the letter, what Father Brennan had said. Decker listened without interrupting, which was how Colt knew he was taking it seriously. Give me 30 minutes, Decker said. I will check hospitals, ERs, accident reports, everything in Coconino and Yavapai counties. And Colt, this woman, she is a nurse at Flagstaff Medical. Emergency department. Why? Nothing yet. Just thinking. Give me 30 minutes. While they waited, Colt found the main number for Flagstaff Medical Center online and navigated the phone tree until he reached the nursing administration office. A tired voice answered. This is Amanda in nursing admin. How can I help you? I need information about Norah Winslow. She is a nurse in your emergency department. She did not come home from her shift yesterday and her 8-year-old daughter has not heard from her. A pause, the sound of typing. Norah was scheduled 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. yesterday. According to our system, she clocked out at 7:14 p.m. Her badge shows she exited the building at 7:22. Is there security footage? Parking lot cameras? I do not have access to that. You would need hospital security or law enforcement. But sir, if Norah is missing, you really should contact the police. We are working on that. Can you connect me with her supervisor, Charlotte Ives? I cannot give out personal numbers, but I can call Charlotte and have her call you. What is your number? Colt provided it and stressed that the situation involved a child alone and terrified. Then he hung up and waited. 5 minutes later, his phone rang. Charlotte Ives was crisp, professional, and clearly shaken. Norah is the most reliable person on my staff, she said. In 3 years, she has not missed a single shift, not one. She volunteers for overtime. She picks up shifts no one else wants. If Norah did not come home, something is very wrong. Was there anything unusual about yesterday? Did she seem upset or worried? Nothing. It was a typical Monday. Busy, but manageable. Norah was actually in a good mood. She told me Birdie had gotten an A on her math test. She was planning to make Birdie's favorite dinner that night. Macaroni and cheese from scratch, she said, not the box kind. Charlotte's voice wavered. She was fine when she left. I saw her walking to her car in the parking lot. She waved goodbye. She was smiling. What time was that? Around 7:20. The lot was still fairly full. Shift change. Colt thanked her and hung up. He relayed everything to Vaughn and Birdie, who had been listening with the focused intensity of a child whose entire world depended on every word. She clocked out at 7:14, Colt said. Left the building at 7:22. That means she was alive and well at the hospital at that time. It is about an hour drive from Flagstaff to Williams. She should have been home by 8:30 at the latest. So something happened between the hospital and here, Vaughn said, on the drive home. Or before she even got in the car, Colt added. But Charlotte saw her walking to the lot. Birdie spoke up. What route does she take? Does anyone know? Colt looked at her. Do you know she takes Route 66 to I-40 East, then up to Flagstaff? She says it is longer than going straight on the interstate, but she likes the old highway. She says it reminds her that some things that everybody has forgotten about are still worth paying attention to. Birdie looked down at the $10 bill still in her hand. We should drive that route. Look for anything. His phone buzzes. A text from Decker. Checked all hospitals and ERs in Coconino and Yavapai counties. No patients matching Norah's description. No Jane Does. No accidents reported on her usual route. Still checking. Good news and bad news folded together like a letter in an envelope. Good that Norah was not in a hospital bed or a morgue. Bad because it meant she had simply vanished from the surface of the earth. We need to go, Birdie said firmly. Right now, we need to drive that route. Birdie, it is getting dark, Vaughn started. I know it is dark. My mama's out there in the dark too, and she is probably a lot more scared than I am. That settled it. They went back outside into the cooling evening air. Stars were beginning to puncture the sky, scattered diamonds on black velvet. Colt helped Birdie into the helmet again, and she climbed onto the back of his bike with more confidence, this time her small arms wrapping around his waist with practiced certainty. The ride from Williams toward Bellamont took them through some of the most desolate stretches of northern Arizona. Route 66 paralleled I-40 for much of the journey, sometimes merging with it, sometimes branching off into forgotten sections of the old highway that crumbled at the edges like stale bread. Colt kept his speed moderate. his eyes sweeping both sides of the road. Behind him, Birdie's body tensed every time they passed a dark turnoff or abandoned structure. Vaughn rode alongside his headlight, cutting a cone of white through the gathering darkness. They had agreed before leaving. Check both the old highway and the interstate shoulder. Look for anything. Tire marks leading off the road. Debris. Broken glass. Any sign that a blue Honda Civic had stopped or been stopped. The highway was sparsely traveled at this hour. Occasional semi-trucks roared past on I-40, their running lights strung out like mobile constellations. The desert stretched away on both sides, vast and indifferent, studded with scrub brush and rock formations that threw strange shadows in the moonlight. They had been riding it for about 20 minutes when Birdie tapped Colt's shoulder. The signal they had agreed on. Colt pulled over immediately, Vaughn following. He killed the engine and helped Birdie off. "What is it, sweetheart?" Birdie pointed ahead where the road curved past a cluster of shapes barely visible in the darkness. A rest area, or what had once been one. A cracked parking lot, a couple of concrete picnic tables, and a boarded-up restroom building that looked like it had not seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. An information kiosk stood at the entrance, its plexiglass covers yellowed and peeling. "I know this place," Birdie said. "Mom and I stopped here for a picnic last spring. She packed sandwiches, and we ate at those tables and watched the sunset. She said this was her favorite spot because nobody ever comes here anymore, and it feels like the whole world is just ours." She looked at Colt with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror. "Can we check?" They walked into the rest area, flashlights sweeping the cracked asphalt. Vaughn moved toward the boarded-up restroom. Colt circled the picnic tables. Nothing seemed out of place. Just another forgotten piece of highway infrastructure slowly returning to the desert. Then Birdie screamed, not a scream of fear, a scream of recognition, of discovery, of everything she had been hoping for and dreading at the same time. "That is Mama's car. That is Mama's car." Colt spun toward where Birdie was pointing. There, partially hidden behind the restroom building, nose in against the back wall, as if someone had deliberately tried to conceal it, sat a blue Honda Civic. Birdie was already running toward it. Colt caught up to her in 3 strides, his hand finding her shoulder. "Wait, let me look first." He approached the car with Vaughn beside him, their flashlights converging on the vehicle. It was a Honda Civic blue older model, a bumper sticker on the rear that read, "Nurses do it with care." And on the driver's side panel, a long scratch in the paint, a mark left by a concrete pole in a hospital parking garage that a woman had been embarrassed about and her daughter had found endlessly amusing. It was Nora's car. There was no question. The driver's side door was locked. Colt tried the passenger side. It opened. He leaned in, scanning the interior with his flashlight. Nora's purse sat on the passenger seat, her phone beside it, the screen dark. Her wallet was in the purse, still containing $23 in cash and all her cards. A coffee travel mug sat in the cup holder, still half full, the liquid inside long cold. Everything was here. Everything except Norah. Vaughn had moved to the rear of the rest area, his flashlight sweeping the ground. "Colt," he called, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Come look at this." Behind the building in the hard-packed dirt, Vaughn's flashlight illuminated a story written in the earth. Tire tracks deep and wide from a vehicle much larger than a Honda Civic. A truck or cargo van based on the spacing. Next to the tracks, the ground was disturbed in a pattern that made Colt's stomach turn. Scuffed earth, drag marks, the disruption that happens when someone fights and someone else overpowers them. And on the ground, half buried in the dust, a small button. Light blue fabric, the kind used on medical scrubs. Colt picked it up carefully with a tissue from his pocket. Even in the flashlight's beam, he could see the dark stain on the fabric around the thread holes. Blood. He looked at Vaughn, making sure his body blocked Birdie's line of sight. Vaughn's expression had gone hard and flat the way it went when the soldier in him took over from the civilian. They both knew what this scene meant. Norah had not left this place willingly. She had been taken, forcibly, by someone driving a large vehicle who had chosen this abandoned rest area precisely because no one would see, no one would hear, and no one would find the evidence until it was too late. Behind them, Birdie stood by her mother's car, pressing her small hands against the window glass, as if she could reach through it and find Norah on the other side. "Where is she?" Her voice was very small. "Why is her car here, but she is not?" Colt called Decker. He kept his voice low and factual, the way you report a situation when civilians are present, and you cannot afford to let emotion compromise the information. "We found the car. Rest area 5 miles west of Belmont on I-40. Blue Honda Civic. Norah is not here, but all her belongings are. Purse, phone, wallet, everything. There are tire tracks from a large vehicle behind the building, signs of a struggle, and a button from what appears to be medical scrubs with what looks like blood on it. I am 10 minutes out, Decker said, all traces of casualness gone from his voice. Do not touch anything else. I am calling this in as a suspected abduction. The next 45 minutes were a blur of sirens and flashing lights. Two sheriff's vehicles arrived first, followed by Decker in an unmarked car. He was stocky and weathered with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a jaw set so tight the muscles in his cheeks bulged. He took one look at the scene and started issuing orders into his radio with the rapid-fire precision of a man who understood that every minute mattered. I need crime scene techs out here now, and pull every traffic camera between here and Flagstaff. We are looking for any large vehicles, trucks, vans, anything in this area between 7:30 and 9 p.m. yesterday. A female deputy guided Birdie to a patrol car, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and speaking to her softly. Birdie answered the deputy's questions with the same determined clarity she had shown all evening, but her eyes never left Colt and Vaughn. A victim advocate named Sandra arrived 20 minutes later. She was kind-faced and professional, and she explained gently that Birdie would need to be placed in a temporary foster home or shelter until Norah was found, or a family member could be located. No, Birdie said. The word was quiet but absolute. I am staying with them. She pointed at Colt and Vaughn. Sweetheart, Sandra began, these men are strangers. We have procedures that are designed to keep you safe. They are not strangers. Birdie's voice did not waver. They promised to find my mama. They believed me when nobody else did. They are the first people who actually did something instead of telling me to wait. She grabbed Colt's hand with both of hers. Please do not make me go with people I do not know. I already know them. I trust them. Decker pulled Colt aside. His voice was low and serious. You know I cannot just hand a child over to civilians. There are rules. Those rules told this girl to wait 24 hours while her mother was being, God knows what Colt said. We have got a head start on this investigation because Birdie refused to accept that. She trusts us. Let us take care of her until you find Norah or until her sister gets here from Phoenix. If anything happens to that child while she is in your care, nothing will happen to her. Vaughn stepped in, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had led soldiers in combat. You know us, Decker. You know what we are. You know we would die before letting anything happen to a kid. Decker studied them both. Then he sighed a sound that said he was about to bend a rule and was not happy about it. 24 hours, that is all I can give you before official channels catch up. She stays with you, but you keep me informed of your location at all times. And if Child Protective Services comes knocking, I do not know anything about this arrangement. Understood, Crystal, Colt said. They went back to Birdie, who looked up at them with eyes that held more hope than any child's eyes should have to hold. You can stay with us, Colt said, but right now you need to rest. We are going to find somewhere safe for you to sleep, and in the morning we are going to keep looking for your mama. I want to keep looking now, Birdie insisted. The best way you can help right now is to stay safe and get some rest. Vaughn's voice was gentle but firm. The police have helicopters, search teams, cameras. They are working through the night. Birdie searched his face for any sign of deception and found none. She nodded slowly, but there was a resistance in her body, a coiled readiness that said she was not surrendering. She was regrouping. Colt carried her to his bike. She was lighter than he expected, and as she settled against his back and her arms wrapped around him, he felt the full weight of what he had taken on. Somewhere in the vast Arizona darkness, Norah Winslow was in the hands of someone who had planned her abduction with cold precision. Every hour that passed reduced the odds of finding her alive. The statistics were merciless, and Colt knew them all. But statistics did not matter to the child holding on to him with everything she had. Her mother was out there, and Colt had made a promise. They rode through the quiet streets of Williams to the Desert Rose Motel, a Route 66 relic with pink stucco walls, turquoise doors, and a vintage neon sign that buzzed and flickered against the night sky. Colt paid cash for 2 adjoining rooms while Birdie leaned against Vaughn's side, her eyes heavy, but her grip on his hand unyielding. It was nearly 1 in the morning when they finally got her settled. Vaughn volunteered to stay in the room with Birdie. Neither man felt comfortable leaving her alone, and Birdie clearly felt safer with someone nearby. As Colt stood in the doorway between the adjoining rooms watching Birdie curl up on the motel bed, still clutching her mother's purse, the crumpled $10 bill visible in her small fist, he thought about his own daughter. Jessa, who was 22 now and living somewhere in California. Jessa, who had stopped returning his calls 3 years ago. Jessa, who had every right to hate him for not being there when she needed him. He had failed that little girl. Failed her so completely that the distance between them felt less like miles and more like geology, like tectonic plates that had shifted and could never be pushed back together. But this little girl, this Birdie Winslow, with her $10 bill and her fierce determination and her refusal to accept that the world would not help her, this child, he would not fail. Not this time. Not if it cost him everything he had left. Colt closed the adjoining door softly and sat down on his own bed with his phone in his hands. Sleep was not coming. Not tonight. Not while Norah Winslow was out there somewhere in the dark. He opened his laptop and started searching. Because somewhere in the space between what the system was willing to do and what needed to be done, there was a gap. And in that gap, a little girl had placed her trust, her last $10, in the most important thing in her world. Colt Hargrove intended to be worthy of all three. The first thing Norah Winslow became aware of was the cold. Not the crisp, clean cold of an Arizona desert night, but a damp mineral cold that seeped up through concrete and settled into bone. The cold of places underground, places where sunlight was a memory and warmth was something that happened to other people. The second thing she became aware of was the pain. It arrived in waves, each one revealing a new geography of damage. Her ribs on the left side screamed with every breath, a sharp, stabbing protest that told her at least two were cracked, possibly broken. Her right eye was swollen, nearly shut the skin around it tight and hot. A cut above her eyebrow had bled freely at some point, and the dry blood had crusted into a mass that pulled when she tried to move her face. Her wrists burned where something rough had abraded the skin, and her shoulders ached with the deep structural pain of joints that had been wrenched beyond their intended range of motion. She had fought. She remembered that much. When the man in the white cargo van had stepped out of the shadows at the rest area, when she had seen the syringe in his hand and understood in a single crystalline moment what was happening, she had fought with everything her body could give. She had thrown her coffee in his face. She had driven her knee into his groin. She had clawed at his eyes and screamed into the empty desert until his fist connected with the side of her head and the world went sideways, then dark. But she had fought, and the injuries she carried were proof that Norah Winslow did not go quietly into anything. She opened her functioning eye and took in her surroundings with the clinical assessment of a woman trained to evaluate crisis situations. She was in a cage, not a metaphorical cage, not a locked room that felt like a cage. An actual cage made of welded steel bars approximately 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 4 feet tall. Not large enough to stand in, barely large enough to lie down in. A thin foam mattress covered the floor of the cage, stained and compressed from use. A plastic bucket sat in one corner, a gallon jug of water in the other. The cage was one of 4 arranged along the wall of a large industrial space. The ceiling was high, supported by rusting steel beams, and the walls were corrugated metal panels that had oxidized to a mottled brown. Industrial equipment, disused and decaying, occupied the far end of the building. Conveyor belts leading nowhere. Sorting tables covered in dust. The skeleton of a processing facility that had once served a purpose and now served a very different one. A single fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly greenish pallor. Somewhere beyond the walls, a generator chugged with the monotonous rhythm of a mechanical heartbeat. Norah was not alone. The cage to her immediate left held a woman she recognized, and that recognition sent a jolt of electricity through her battered body that was more powerful than any of her injuries. Tessa Hambright, Tessa, who had worked in the emergency department at Flagstaff Medical Center, Tessa, who had a 3-year-old son named Oliver, and a laugh that could fill an entire break room. Tessa, who had supposedly resigned 2 months ago and moved to Denver to be closer to family. Tessa, who the hospital administration had written off with a shrug and a requisition for a replacement hire. Tessa was curled on her side in the adjacent cage, her eyes open, watching Norah with an expression that contained recognition and relief and a terrible bone-deep exhaustion. She had lost weight, a lot of it. Her cheeks were hollow, and her collarbones jutted beneath the dirty scrubs she still wore, and her wrists were ringed with the same abrasion marks that burned on Norah's own skin. In the 2 cages beyond Tessa were 2 more women. Norah did not recognize the one in the 3rd cage, a thin woman with auburn hair who appeared to be sleeping or unconscious. But the woman in the 4th cage, the one farthest from the door, she knew. Colleen Ferris, another nurse from Flagstaff Medical, disappeared 4 months ago. The hospital said she had taken a travel nursing contract in New Mexico. No one had questioned it. And beyond Colleen, in the last cage sat a woman with gray-streaked hair and hollow eyes, who stared at the wall with the vacant expression of someone who had stopped expecting rescue a long time ago. Bethany Strand, 8 months. 8 months in a cage. The full horror of what Norah was looking at settled over her, like a physical weight pressing on her shoulders, on her chest, compressing the air from her damaged lungs. This was not random. This was not opportunistic. Someone had been hunting nurses from her hospital, selecting them with care, taking them one by one, and nobody had noticed. Nobody had connected the disappearances. Nobody had asked the right questions. Because these women, all of them, fit a profile that made them easy to forget. Single mothers, women without extensive family networks, women who worked brutal hours in a system that consumed them and barely noticed when they were gone. Women like Norah. Tessa's voice came as a whisper, cracked and dry. "You are the new one." It was not a question. Tessa Norah breathed. "My God, they told us you moved to Denver. They told us you resigned." Tessa's smile held no warmth. "That is what he tells them. He has access to our HR files. He submits the resignation letters himself, forges our signatures. By the time anyone thinks to check, the trail is cold, and the system has already moved on." "Who is he?" "His name is Glenn Mercer. He drives a delivery van for HealthStar Medical Supply. He comes into the hospital 3 times a week. Nobody looks twice at the delivery guy." Tessa's eyes drifted closed, then opened again with effort. "He picks us, studies us, knows our schedules, our routes, our weaknesses. He knew I always took the back road through Kachina Village. He knew Colleen stopped at the same gas station every night. He knew Bethany walked to her car alone because she always stayed late to finish her charts. And me," Norah said, "he knew I took Route 66. He tampered with something on your car, probably. That is how he did it with Colleen. Loosened her battery cables so her car died at just the right spot. By the time she got out to check, he was already there." Norah's mind was racing even through the fog of pain. Not with panic. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. She was thinking the way she thought in the emergency department when a trauma patient arrived and the clock started ticking. Assessment, triage, action. "He comes most mornings," Tessa continued, her voice barely audible. "Brings food, water, checks on us. We sort and package the supplies he brings in. Medical equipment, medications. He steals them from hospital shipments and sells them. We are his workforce. If we do not work, we do not eat. Some nights he stays over, sleeps in the back room. Those nights are the worst because he drinks and gets mean. But even those nights, he eventually passes out." "Where are we?" "Old mine. Somewhere in the mountains north of Prescott. Copper Ridge, I think. I heard him say the name on a phone call once." Norah filed that information away. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her chest since the moment she opened her eye and understood where she was. "Does he have a phone?" Tessa's gaze sharpened. "On the workbench against the wall. He charges it there when he stays the night. It is close to my cage, maybe 4 feet from the bars, but the charging cable runs along the bench edge. We have tried to reach it. Our arms are not long enough, and there is nothing to hook it with." Norah absorbed this. 4 feet from Tessa's bars, a charging cable running along the edge of the bench. Not reachable by hand, but reachable by something with length and a hook at the end. She closed her eye and thought about Birdie. In the quiet that followed, Norah let herself travel back. Not to escape the present, but to understand how the present had become inevitable. It had started 2 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon that had seemed entirely ordinary. Norah had been charting at the nursing station when she noticed Tessa's name on the schedule board crossed out with a single red line. She had asked Charlotte Ives, the nursing supervisor, what happened. Charlotte's response had been casual in the way that institutional responses always are when the institution does not want to examine something too closely. Tessa resigned. Family reasons, moving to Denver, happened pretty suddenly, but you know how it is. People get an opportunity and they take it. But Norah knew Tessa, not intimately, not the way you know a best friend, but the way nurses know each other after years of sharing the same trenches. Tessa loved Flagstaff. She talked about the ponderosa pines constantly, about how the smell of them after rain was the closest thing to heaven she had ever experienced. She had no family in Denver. Her parents were in Tucson, and she had been in the middle of enrolling Oliver in a new preschool that she had been on the waiting list for since he was born. People do not abandon waiting lists they have been on for 3 years. People do not leave jobs they love without saying goodbye to their colleagues. People do not vanish without a trace unless something has gone terribly wrong. So Nora had started paying attention, quietly, carefully, the way a woman who has spent her life surviving learns to observe without being observed. She began with the medication records. As an emergency department nurse, she had access to the electronic health record system, including medication administration logs. What she found made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Discrepancies, small ones at first, easy to overlook if you were not looking. A vial of morphine signed out for a patient who had been discharged hours before it was administered. Fentanyl patches recorded as applied to patients whose charts showed no pain management orders. Ketamine logged as used for procedural sedation on procedures that had never taken place. The quantities were not enormous. A few vials here, a few patches there, but over weeks and months they added up to a significant volume of controlled substances that were leaving the hospital and going somewhere they should not go. Every discrepancy had the same authorizing signature. Dr. Warren Price. Price was an attending physician in the emergency department. Mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore his authority like an expensive suit. He had been at Flagstaff Medical for 12 years and was considered one of the pillars of the department. He sat on the hospital ethics committee. He mentored medical students. He had a framed photograph on his office wall of himself shaking hands with the governor at a healthcare fundraiser. He was also, Norah now believed, the architect of a theft operation that was draining the hospital's pharmaceutical inventory and funneling it into the black market. She had started copying records, not on the hospital computers where digital footprints could be tracked, but by photographing screens with her phone during quiet moments on the night shift. She transferred the images to a USB drive at home, building a file that grew thicker with each passing week. Dates, medication names, quantities, Price's electronic signature, patient chart numbers that did not match authorization codes that had been entered after hours when no patients were present. She had been meticulous. She had been thorough. And she had been afraid. Because the medication discrepancies were troubling, but they were not the thing that kept Norah awake at night. The thing that kept her awake was the connection she had drawn between the missing drugs and the missing nurses. Tessa had disappeared first, then Colleen, then Bethany, all from the same department. All single mothers, all women who worked alone, who drove home on empty roads, who had no one waiting to raise an alarm if they did not arrive. Norah had begun to suspect that these women had not left voluntarily, that they had seen something, noticed something, stumbled across the same discrepancies Norah had found, and they had been silenced. She did not know how. She did not know by whom. She only knew that the pattern was too precise to be coincidence. And then 3.5 weeks before her own disappearance, Norah had found the evidence that confirmed her worst fears. She had been working a night shift when a delivery arrived from Health Star Medical Supply. The regular driver, a quiet man she knew only by his first name, was not there. In his place was a substitute who seemed nervous, who fumbled with the paperwork, who dropped a box of surgical supplies and cursed under his breath. While he was picking up the scattered contents, Norah noticed a second manifest tucked inside the delivery folder. It was a list of items that did not match the official order: controlled substances, surgical instruments, monitoring equipment, all marked with a code she did not recognize and a destination address that was not the hospital. She had photographed that manifest before the substitute driver returned to collect his paperwork. The next morning, she had come out to the hospital parking lot and found a note tucked under her windshield wiper. A single word written in block capitals on a torn piece of cardboard. Careful! That was the moment Norah Winslow understood that she was no longer an observer. She was a target. She had gone home that day and done 3 things. First, she had copied every file from the USB drive and hidden the original inside Birdie's stuffed bear, the one called Bear Bear, that had been Birdie's constant companion since she was 2 years old. She had opened a seam in the bear's back with a razor blade, slipped the drive inside, and stitched it closed with the neat, precise sutures of a woman who had spent years closing wounds. No one would think to look inside a child's toy. No one would think a stuffed bear with one loose eye held the evidence to dismantle a criminal enterprise. Second, she had written the emergency letter and placed it in the lockbox with her important documents. The letter to Jolene. The letter that Birdie had read aloud in her small, careful voice just hours ago. Third, she had gone to confession. Not because she had sinned, but because she needed to tell someone, anyone, that she was afraid. The seal of confession meant Father Brennan could never repeat what she said, but at least someone in the world would know that Norah Winslow had seen something terrible and had tried to do the right thing. And then she had done what she always did. She went back to work. She cared for her patients. She picked Birdie up from school. She made dinner. She read bedtime stories. She lived her life with the disciplined normalcy of a woman who understood that the best way to protect her daughter was to keep moving forward, to not let the fear become visible, to not give whoever was watching any reason to accelerate their timeline. She had been planning to take the evidence to the FBI. She had researched the field office in Flagstaff, found the number, written it down. She was going to call on Tuesday, the very next day. But Glenn Mercer had gotten to her first. Now lying in a cage in an abandoned mine, her body broken and her hope flickering, Norah understood the full scope of what she was dealing with. Glenn was not the brain. Glenn was the muscle. The brain was still at the hospital, still wearing a white coat, still signing fraudulent medication orders, with the casual authority of a man who believed himself untouchable. Price was the one who chose the targets. Price was the one who identified which nurses were vulnerable, which ones lived alone, which ones had noticed too much. And Price was the one who would continue operating long after Glenn disposed of the evidence in this mine. Because that was what men like Price did. They sacrificed their foot soldiers and rebuilt their operations from the ashes. Unless someone stopped them. Unless the evidence survived. Norah touched her chest where her silver cross necklace still hung, the one her mother had given her when she left West Virginia. Her mother's hands rough from years of factory work clasping the chain around her neck. Her mother's voice low and steady. "This will protect you, baby girl. Wherever you go, this goes with you. And wherever this goes, I am with you too." The cross had not protected Norah from being taken, but it was still here. She was still here. And somewhere in Williams, Arizona, in a small house with faded blue paint and wind chimes on the porch, a stuffed bear with one loose eye held the key to everything. She just had to find a way to tell someone where to look. Norah closed her eye and began to plan. In the Desert Rose Motel, sleep had come for Birdie the way it comes for children who have exhausted every reserve of energy and emotion they possess. Not gently but suddenly, like a trapdoor opening beneath consciousness. One moment she had been sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching her mother's purse and insisting she was not tired. The next she was curled on her side, still dressed, still holding the purse, breathing with the deep rhythmic cadence of genuine sleep. Vaughn had covered her with the motel blanket and positioned himself in the chair by the window, his body angled toward the door, a soldier's vigil. He dozed in short intervals, never fully asleep, his awareness cycling through the room like a searchlight sweeping a perimeter. In the adjoining room, Colt had not slept at all. He sat propped against the headboard, with his laptop balanced on his knees, the screen's glow painting his face in blue light. The search had started with Flagstaff Medical Center and spiraled outward from there, each discovery pulling him deeper into a pattern that made his gut clench with the cold recognition of something fundamentally wrong. 3 nurses had left Flagstaff Medical Center in the past year, under circumstances that the hospital described as voluntary resignations. Tessa Hambright 2 months ago, Colleen Ferris 4 months ago, Bethany Strand 8 months ago. All emergency department staff, all single mothers, all had supposedly left for personal or family reasons. All had social media accounts that had gone abruptly silent after their departure dates. Colt pulled up what he could find on each woman. Tessa Hambright's Facebook page showed a vibrant, engaged life. Photos of her son Oliver at the park, check-ins at Flagstaff restaurants, posts about nursing school reunions and hiking trips. Then nothing. The last entry was a photograph of Oliver covered in birthday cake frosting, captioned, "My baby is 3, followed by a string of heart emojis. After that, silence. No posts, no comments, no likes, as if the woman behind the account had simply ceased to exist. Colleen Ferris showed the same pattern, an active Instagram presence documenting her life in Flagstaff, her garden, her cats, her daughter's school play. The last post was a photo of a sunset over the San Francisco peaks with the caption, "Home." Then the account went dark. Bethany Strand's trail was identical. Active presence, sudden silence. Her last post was a recipe for banana bread that she had tagged with a note saying she was making it for her nursing station's potluck the following week. She never made it to the potluck. She never made the banana bread. She was simply gone. 3 women. 3 disappearances that no one had connected because each one had been wrapped in the plausible packaging of a voluntary departure. Resignation letters filed, personal belongings cleared from lockers, forwarding addresses provided to HR departments that never bothered to verify them. It was professional, methodical, and it had been happening in plain sight. Colt called Decker. It was nearly 3 in the morning, but Decker answered on the first ring. He had not been sleeping either. Decker, I think we are looking at multiple victims. 3 nurses from the same hospital disappeared in the past year. Same department, same profile as Norah. All single mothers, all supposedly resigned voluntarily. But their social media accounts all went dark on the same day they allegedly left. Decker was quiet for a beat. Then his voice came back tight and focused. I pulled the evidence report from the rest area. The tire tracks match a full-size cargo van, probably a commercial vehicle. And the keychain tag, you flagged the one engraved with Prescott Fleet Services. That is a vehicle maintenance outfit. I have already got a call into them. They open at 7. But there is something else. Health Star Medical Supply has a service contract with Flagstaff Medical Center. Their delivery schedule puts their vehicles in the hospital parking lot 3 to 4 times per week. Colt's mind connected the dots with the speed and precision of a man who had spent years reading terrain for threats. Someone with a delivery route to the hospital. Someone who came and went without attracting attention. Someone who had access to the building, to the staff schedules, to the parking lot, where nurses walked alone to their cars after 12-hour shifts. Someone nobody looked at twice because he was just the delivery guy. Decker Colt said, "Can you pull employee records for HealthStar, specifically anyone assigned to the Flagstaff medical route?" "Working on it. I have got the FBI field office looped in as of an hour ago. Agent named Deering. She is sharp. She is treating this as a potential serial abduction, which means federal resources warrants the whole arsenal. But the wheels grind slow at this hour. Earliest we will have anything actionable is probably 6 or 7 a.m. That is too long, I know, but we are doing everything we can within the law. And Colt, if this is what we think it is, we cannot afford to spook whoever is behind it. If they think we are closing in, they might destroy evidence. Or worse." The unspoken implication hung in the air between them like smoke. A soft knock on the adjoining door, Jaguar pulled Colt from his thoughts. Vaughn slipped through, pulling the door closed behind him with care. "Birdie is sleeping hard," Vaughn said, settling into the chair opposite the bed. "But even in her sleep, she is holding on to that purse like it is a lifeline." He paused. "What have you got?" Colt filled him in on everything. The 3 missing nurses, the social media patterns, the Health Star connection. Vaughn listened with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, his expression growing darker with each detail. "So we are not looking at an isolated abduction," Vaughn said. "We are looking at someone who has been doing this for at least 8 months, targeting specific women, covering his tracks with fake resignations." "And nobody noticed," Colt said, "because these women are invisible to the system. Single mothers working 60-hour weeks. No spouses to raise alarms. Limited family nearby. Women who fall through the cracks because the cracks in this country are wide enough to swallow people whole." The door between the rooms opened again, and this time it was Birdie. She stood in the doorway in her rumpled clothes, her hair a mess, her eyes still swollen from crying, but alert in a way that said she had been awake longer than they realized. "I heard you talking," she said. "There are other missing women." "Birdie, you should be sleeping," Vaughn started. "I cannot sleep knowing my mama is out there. And I heard what you said. 3 other nurses from Mama's hospital." She walked to the bed and sat down, pulling her mother's purse into her lap, with the deliberate care of someone handling evidence, which Colt realized with a start was exactly what she was doing. "I have been thinking," Birdie said, and when Colt looked at her face, he saw something there that reminded him of every good commanding officer he had ever served under. Focus, clarity, the ability to compartmentalize fear in order to function. This child had learned that skill somewhere, and the most likely teacher was the woman they were trying to find. "Mama was scared," Birdie continued. "We know that from the letter and from what Father Brennan said. But Mama is not the kind of person who just gets scared and does nothing. If she was afraid of someone, she would have done something about it. She would have tried to protect us." Birdie opened the purse and began going through it methodically. Wallet, phone, a compact mirror, a pack of tissues, a tube of lip balm, a small sewing kit. And then Birdie's fingers found something in the purse's interior zippered pocket, a small compartment that could easily be overlooked. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, small torn from a pocket notebook covered in Nora's handwriting. Birdie unfolded it carefully and held it under the lamplight. It was a license plate number, Arizona plates, and beneath the number in Nora's careful script were two words, white van. Birdie looked up at Colt, and in her eyes he saw the same fierce determination that had driven her to walk into a diner and offer two bikers her last $10. Mama wrote this down. She saw whoever was following her, and she wrote down their license plate. She was gathering evidence. Colt took the paper from Birdie's hand with the reverence of a man accepting a battlefield communique. He was on the phone with Decker within seconds. Arizona plate, he read the number carefully twice. Norah had it in her purse. She wrote white van underneath. She was tracking whoever was following her. Decker's response was immediate. Give me 5 minutes. I am running it now. The 5 minutes felt like an hour. Birdie sat perfectly still on the bed, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on Colt's face as if she could read the results of the search in his expression before he heard them himself. Decker called back. The plate comes back to a 2019 Ford Transit cargo van registered to Health Star Medical Supply, operating out of their Prescott depot. The vehicle is assigned to an employee named Glenn Mercer, 37 years old. Prior conviction for domestic assault in 2016, served 18 months. Current address listed in Camp Verde, about 30 miles south of Flagstaff. Colt felt the pieces locking into place with a precision that was almost physical, like the sound of a rifle bolt sliding home. That is our guy, Colt said. Decker Glenn Mercer has been using his delivery route to identify and stalk nurses at the hospital. He has access to the building, to the parking lot, to their schedules. He is the one who took Norah. I am calling Agent Deering right now. She can have a warrant for Mercer and Health Star by morning. We are going to find this son of a... Decker caught himself. We are going to find him. Birdie spoke after Colt ended the call. Her voice was very quiet but very steady. Mama saw him. She knew he was watching her. And she did not run. She stayed because of Model, because she could not afford to lose her job, could not afford to uproot us, could not afford to start over again. So she wrote down his plate number, and she kept going to work every day knowing that man was out there. Birdie's chin trembled, but she did not cry. She had moved past crying into something harder, something older than her years. My mama is the bravest person in the whole world. Colt had no argument for that. At 4:30 in the morning, headlights swept across the motel parking lot, and a car door opened and closed with the careful restraint of someone trying not to wake the world. A moment later, there was a knock on the door. Colt answered with his hand near his belt, an instinct he could not override. But the woman standing in the glow of the motel's porch light was not a threat. She was in her early 40s with the same dark hair and angular jaw as Norah, and her eyes were red from 3 hours of driving and a lifetime's worth of worry compressed into a single night. Jolene Falk, Mr. Hargrove. Her voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a woman holding herself together through sheer force of will. I am Nora's sister. I got the call from your friend. I left Phoenix the minute I hung up the phone. Before Cole could respond, Birdie appeared behind him. The child looked at her aunt for one long moment, and then the armor cracked. All the strength, all the determination, all the fierce composure that had carried this 8-year-old through the worst night of her life, it all came apart in the presence of family. Aunt Jolene. Birdie launched herself into her aunt's arms, and Jolene caught her and held on with a fierceness that made the air around them feel electric. They stood like that in the motel doorway, the aunt and the niece rocking gently, while the last stars faded from the Arizona sky. Inside the room with Birdie curled against her side on the bed, Jolene told them what she knew. Norah called me 3 weeks ago. It was the first time we had spoken in over a year. We had a falling out, stupid family stuff. I said things I should not have said about her leaving West Virginia, about how she was running from her problems instead of facing them. She stopped calling. I was too proud to call her. Jolene's face contorted with guilt. But 3 weeks ago, she called at 2 in the morning. She was whispering. She said she had found something at work, something dangerous, and she was afraid that the people involved would come after her. I asked her what she found, and she said she could not tell me on the phone, but she had made copies of everything and hidden them somewhere safe. Hidden them where Vaughn asked. That is the thing, Jolene said. She told me, and at the time, I thought she was being paranoid. She said the evidence was in Birdie's stuffed bear. Bear. She said she had sewn a USB drive into the stuffing. She said if anything happened to her, I should get Bear and take the drive to the FBI. The room went very still. Birdie lifted her head from Jolene's shoulder. Bear. My bear. Mama put something inside Bear. It is in your room, sweetheart. On your bed right where you left it. Colt looked at Vaughn. In the economy of their silent communication, they reached the same conclusions simultaneously. Norah Winslow had not been a passive victim. She had been building a case. She had identified the discrepancies, documented the evidence, and hidden it in the one place that no one, not a delivery driver, not a corrupt doctor, not a law enforcement officer conducting a routine search would ever think to look. Inside a child's beloved, bedraggled stuffed animal. It was brilliant. It was desperate. And it might be the thing that saved not just Norah, but every woman imprisoned in whatever dark hole Glenn Mercer had built for them. We cannot go get it right now, Colt said. The house might be watched. If Price the doctor, Norah suspected if he knows she had evidence, he might have people watching the house. Who is Price, Jolene asked. Colt laid it out. Dr. Warren Price, attending physician, the signatures on the fraudulent medication records the connection between the stolen drugs and the missing nurses. Jolene listened with a face that cycled through shock, anger, and a cold, focused fury that reminded Colt very much of Birdie. Norah figured all of this out, Jolene said, by herself, while working full-time and raising a daughter alone. And nobody helped her, nobody protected her. We are here now, Vaughn said, and we are not leaving until she is home. The sky outside the motel window was beginning to lighten, the first gray hints of dawn softening the edges of the darkness. It was Thursday morning. Norah had been missing for approximately 36 hours. Every hour that passed was a weight on the scale, tipping the odds further in the wrong direction. Colt's phone rang, unknown number. He answered with a wariness that had become second nature over the past 12 hours. Hello, a woman's voice, weak, frightened, and fighting to be heard over the static of a failing connection. Is this Colt Hargrove, please? Please tell me this is Colt Hargrove. Yes, who is this? My name is Tessa Hambright. I am a nurse. I was taken from Flagstaff 2 months ago. I do not have much time. He will check on us soon, but please listen carefully. Norah is here. She is alive. She told me to make this call. Colt's heart slammed against his ribs. Where are you? Tell me exactly where you are. An old mining camp, north of Prescott. It is called Copper Ridge, the old copper processing plant. He keeps us in the main building. There are 4 of us, Norah, me, Colleen, and Bethany. Please, Norah is hurt bad. She fought him when he brought her in and he beat her. She has broken ribs. She might have a concussion. She needs medical attention. I am coming. Tell me how to get there. I do not know the roads. I just know the name. Copper Ridge Mine. It is off a dirt road in the National Forest. There is a sign old and rusted at the turnoff. You cannot see it at night, but in the daylight it is there. The connection crackled. Tessa's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. He is coming back. I have to put the phone back. Tessa, how did you make this call? Norah. She waited until he passed out drunk in the back room. Then she unclasped her necklace, the silver cross she wears, and bent the chain into a hook. She used it to snag the charging cable on the bench and drag the phone close enough for me to grab through the bars. My cage is the closest to the bench. She told me to call the last number that showed on the screen. Your number. The line went dead. Colt stood motionless for 3 full seconds. Then he moved. He explained everything in rapid, compressed sentences to him while pulling on his boots and reaching for his vest. Vaughn was already on his feet. Jolene held Birdie tighter, her face white. Birdie's expression was something Colt would remember for the rest of his life. Not relief, not yet, because relief implied safety, and her mother was far from safe. It was something more primal than relief. It was the face of a child who had been told that her mother was alive, that her mother had not abandoned her, that her mother had fought back and was still fighting, still thinking, still maneuvering from inside a cage to save herself and 3 other women. Mama sent the call, Birdie whispered. She found a way. She found a way, Colt confirmed. He was already dialing Decker. The phone rang once. Copper Ridge Mine, north of Prescott, old copper processing plant off a Forest Service road. 4 women. Norah is alive but injured. Glenn Mercer is the captor. We need the FBI tactical team there now. Decker's response was immediate. I am calling Agent Deering. She has got a team staged in Prescott from the warrant preparation. They can redirect. But Colt, it is going to take them at least 90 minutes to mobilize and get up into those mountains. The roads up there are rough and they will want to approach with caution. 90 minutes, Colt repeated. He looked at his phone's GPS. He looked at Vaughn. "We can be there in 40. Decker's voice hardened. "Do not do anything stupid. Wait for the tactical team. You are civilians. You have no authority, no equipment, no backup. We have 2 Harleys and 15 years of combined combat experience. And there is a woman in a cage who just risked everything to make a phone call so we could find her." The silence on Decker's end lasted exactly 2 seconds. "I will tell Deering you are en route, but for the love of God, observe only. Do not engage unless lives are in immediate danger." "Understood." Colt ended the call and turned to Birdie. The child was already standing, her jaw set, her eyes bright with that terrible, beautiful determination. "You are going to find her," Birdie said. It was not a question and it was not a plea. It was a statement of faith as absolute and unshakable as anything Colt had ever encountered. "We are going to bring her home," Colt said. Birdie reached into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out the crumpled $10 bill. She pressed it into Colt's hand, closing his thick, calloused fingers around it with both of her small ones. "For luck," she said. "Bring it back to me when you bring Mama back." Colt looked at the bill in his hand, this crumpled piece of currency that was worth $10 to the world and worth everything to the child who had given it. He tucked it carefully into the inner pocket of his vest, right over his heart. "Stay with your aunt," he said. "Stay in this room. Do not open the door for anyone except Decker or someone he sends." Birdie nodded. Then she reached up and hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his neck with a strength that defied her size, and for one moment Colt allowed himself to hold on, to feel the weight and warmth of a child's trust, to remember what it had been like to be someone's protector. Then he let go. Outside, the dawn was breaking over the desert, pale gold light spilling across the eastern horizon and painting the clouds in shades of rose and amber. The air was cold and still holding its breath. Colt and Vaughn mounted their bikes in silence, the engines turning over with a rumble that shattered the morning's fragile quiet. Vaughn caught Colt's eye across the chrome and leather. No words were necessary. They had ridden together through 15 years of open road, through grief and anger, and the slow, hard work of learning to live with what they had seen and done. They had found each other in a church basement in Flagstaff and built a friendship on the unspoken understanding that some things cannot be fixed, only carried. And you carry them better when you are not carrying them alone. Now they were riding towards something they had both been searching for without knowing it. Not freedom, not escape, not the numbing rhythm of miles passing beneath their wheels. Something harder and more important than any of those things. Purpose. They pulled out of the Desert Rose parking lot and turned south, heading for the interstate that would carry them toward Prescott and the mountains beyond. The road stretched ahead of them, gray and certain, and they rode into the breaking day with the sun behind them and the shadows reaching forward like fingers pointing the way. Behind them, in a motel room with turquoise walls and a rattling air conditioner, Birdie Winslow stood at the window and watched them go. She pressed her palm flat against the glass as if she could reach through it and touch them, keep them safe, pull them back to her when the time came. And in an abandoned mine in the mountains north of Prescott, Norah Winslow sat in a cage with broken ribs and a swollen eye, and a plan that had worked. A plan built from a silver cross bent into a hook, a charging cable dragged across a workbench, and the unshakable conviction that her daughter would not give up on her. She had been right. Birdie had not given up. Birdie had walked into a diner with $10 and a broken heart and found 2 men who still remembered how to keep a promise. And now those men were coming racing south through the Arizona dawn, and behind them the machinery of law enforcement was grinding into motion. And somewhere in a house on a quiet street in Williams, a stuffed bear with one loose eye held the evidence that would bring everything crashing down. Norah did not know any of this. Not yet. She only knew what she had always known, what had carried her from West Virginia to Arizona, from a $200 bank account to a nursing degree, from a rusted station wagon to a life she had built with her own 2 hands. She knew that giving up was not something Winslow women did. And she knew with the bone-deep certainty of a mother who has spent 8 years studying every facet of her daughter's fierce and tender heart that Birdie was out there, fighting, searching, refusing to let the world tell her that her mother was gone. "Hold on," Norah whispered into the darkness of the cage. "Mama is right here, and my girl is coming." The road south from Williams to Prescott carved through some of the most unforgiving landscape in northern Arizona. Interstate 40 gave way to Highway 89, which dropped through high desert into the Prescott National Forest, where ponderosa pines stood like sentinels along ridge lines, and the air thinned with every mile of elevation gained. The temperature had fallen into the low 40s, and the wind cut through leather and denim with the indifferent precision of a scalpel. Colt and Volman rode hard, not recklessly because recklessness was for men who had nothing to lose, and they had everything to lose now. But fast. Faster than the speed limit. Faster than caution. Fast enough that the white dashes on the highway blurred into a single continuous line, and the world narrowed to the cone of light thrown by their headlamps, and the road unfurling before them like a promise. Neither man spoke. There was nothing to say that the engines were not already saying. The Harleys roared through the pre-dawn darkness with a sound that was part thunder and part prayer, and behind them the eastern sky brightened by degrees, painting the clouds in colors that had no names. Colt's phone buzzed in his vest pocket. He could feel it against his chest, pressed against the crumpled $10 bill Birdie had given him. He waited until the next straightaway, then pulled it out with one hand and glanced at the screen. A text from Decker. Prescott Fleet Services confirms Hellstar Medical Supply has 3 vehicles serviced at their facility. One of them, a 2019 Ford Transit, was last brought in for an oil change 6 weeks ago by an employee named Glenn Mercer. Vehicle GPS shows it made multiple trips to a location north of Prescott in the Copper Ridge Mining District. Last GPS ping was yesterday at 4:47 p.m. A second text 30 seconds later. FBI tactical team en route from Prescott. ETA to Copper Ridge, approximately 75 minutes. Agent Deering commanding. She says do not engage. Observe and report only. Colt tucked the phone away and focused on the road. 75 minutes. If he and Vaughn maintained their current pace, they would reach the Copper Ridge turnoff in less than 30. That left a 45-minute window between their arrival and the arrival of the people with badges and body armor and the legal authority to kick in doors. 45 minutes was a very long time when someone was hurt and caged. The turnoff came sooner than expected. A dirt road branching off the paved highway marked by a rusted metal sign that had once read Copper Ridge Mining Company, but was now mostly illegible, the letters eaten away by decades of weather and neglect. Desert brush had grown up around the sign's base, nearly concealing it. You could drive past it 100 times and never know it was there. Colt slowed and turned it onto the dirt road. Immediately the ride changed. The surface was rutted and uneven, scarred by years of erosion and disuse. Rocks jutted from the packed earth like broken teeth, and the bikes lurched and shuddered as their suspensions fought to absorb the punishment. Pine branches hung low over the road, scraping against their helmets and shoulders as they passed beneath. They rode for another 20 minutes, climbing steadily. The forest thickened around them, the pines growing taller and closer together until the canopy blocked most of the lightning sky. The air smelled of resin and wet earth, and something else underneath, something metallic and old, the ghost scent of copper ore that had been pulled from these mountains a half-century ago. Then Colt raised his hand. Vaughn saw the signal, and both bikes rolled to a stop. They were at the edge of a clearing. Below them, in a natural depression in the mountainside, the Copper Ridge mine complex spread out like the remains of a small town that had been abandoned mid-sentence. A cluster of buildings in various stages of collapse. Rusted equipment scattered like the bones of mechanical giants. A massive slag heap, oxidized to green and brown, rising behind the structures like a man-made hill. Railroad tracks that led from the mine entrance to a loading platform, the rails bent and separated, weeds growing between the ties. Most of the buildings were dark and clearly derelict, roofs caved-in walls leaning at angles that defied gravity. But one structure, the largest, the one that would have been the ore processing plant, showed signs of recent occupation. Its walls were intact. Its roof, though patched in places with mismatched materials, was solid. And from somewhere inside came the steady thrum of a generator. Parked beside the building, its white paint ghostly in the pre-dawn light, was a Ford Transit cargo van. Even from this distance, Colt could read the words on the side panel. Hellstar Medical Supply. Colt cut his engine. Vaughn did the same. The silence that followed was so complete, it had a physical texture like cotton pressed against the eardrums. Then as their hearing adjusted, the sounds of the mountain filtered in. Wind through pine needles, the distant call of a bird, the generator's heartbeat muffled by walls but persistent. They dismounted and moved the bikes off the road, concealing them behind a stand of scrub oak. Then they proceeded on foot. The training came back without being summoned. It lived in their muscles, in the cadence of their breathing, in the way they automatically spaced themselves 10 meters apart and communicated through hand signals that they had not used in years, but had never forgotten. Left hand raised, fist closed. Stop. Right hand extended, 2 fingers pointing. Move that direction, then palm pressed downward. Get low. They circled the clearing, staying inside the tree line, working their way around to a position that gave them a view of the building's entrance. A heavy steel door, newer than the structure it was set into, secured with a padlock. One window on the near side covered from the inside with something opaque. No other visible points of entry from this angle. Colt checked his phone, still 30 minutes before the FBI team would arrive. He texted Decker their position and a description of the layout. Then he settled into a crouch behind a fallen pine and watched. For 7 minutes, nothing happened. The van sat motionless. The generator hummed. The building kept its secrets behind walls that had once processed copper ore and now processed something far more valuable and far more terrible. Then they heard it, a sound that came through the walls and across the clearing and hit Colt in the center of his chest like a round from a rifle. A woman screaming. The scream was short, cut off abruptly, the way screams are cut off when someone stops them by force. It was followed by a crash, the sound of metal striking metal, and then a voicemail raised in anger. The words were indistinct, muffled by the walls, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the voice of a man accustomed to absolute control, encountering something that defied it. Colt looked at Vaughn. Their eyes met across 15 feet of mountain scrub, and in that look was a conversation that lasted less than a second, but contained everything that mattered. Decker had said, "Observe only. Do not engage. Wait for the tactical team." But the tactical team was 30 minutes away, and a woman had just screamed, and the scream had been cut off, and in the calculus of violence that both men understood from years of combat, the silence after a cut-off scream was worse than the scream itself. The silence meant something was happening. The silence meant someone was being hurt. And in 30 minutes, hurt could become something that no amount of badges or warrants could undo. Vaughn held up his hand. Wait, another sound from inside. This time not a scream, but a voice, female. Defiant. The words carried through the walls with a clarity that suggested they were being shouted. You can break every bone in my body, and I will not tell you where it is. You hear me? I will die before I tell you. Norah Winslow, with her broken ribs and her swollen eye, and her body that had already taken more punishment than most people endure in a lifetime, was still fighting, still protecting the evidence, still buying time for a rescue she could not know was 90 feet away, crouched in the trees and struggling with the arithmetic of intervention. A male voice responded, louder now, closer to the door. Then your kid pays for it. I know where she lives. I know where she goes to school. I know every inch of that little house with the garden gnome out front. The words reached Colt like an electric current. He was on his feet before his conscious mind made the decision to move. Vaughn was half a step behind him. There was no more calculation, no more waiting. The equation had resolved itself into the simplest possible terms. A child had been threatened. A woman was being tortured. And two men who had spent their lives training for exactly this kind of moment were done watching from the trees. They crossed the clearing in seconds, moving low and fast. Colt reached the steel door first. The padlock was heavy-duty commercial grade, but the hasp it was attached to was bolted into wood that had been softening for 50 years. Vaughn hit the door once with his shoulder. The wood around the hasp splintered. He hit it again, and the hasp tore free, entirely screws and splinters, erupting outward as the door swung inward and banged against the interior wall. The scene inside imprinted itself on Colt's memory with the permanent, indelible clarity of a photograph taken by lightning. The processing building had been converted into a workspace in a prison. Metal shelving lined one wall, stacked with boxes of medical supplies. Bags, pharmaceutical packaging, surgical instruments still wrapped in sterile covers. A long table in the center of the room held sorting trays, scales, and shipping materials. This was where the stolen goods were processed, organized, and prepared for sale. Against the opposite wall stood 4 cages. Steel bars welded into frames bolted to the concrete floor. Each cage was approximately the size of a large dog kennel. Each contained a woman. Tessa Hambright in the cage nearest the workbench, her face gaunt but alert, her eyes tracking the movement with the desperate attention of someone who has imagined rescue so many times that the real thing seems impossible. Colleen Ferris in the next cage pressed against the bars, her hands white-knuckled around the steel. Bethany Strand in the third cage sitting upright for the first time in months, her hollow eyes wide and disbelieving. And Norah Winslow in the cage closest to the back wall, sitting with her back straight and her chin up despite the blood on her face and the way she held her left arm against her ribs to brace them. Even from across the room, even through the damage that had been done to her, Colt could see Birdie in that face. The same jaw, the same defiance, the same absolute refusal to surrender. Standing in the center of the room between the work table and the cages was a man who matched no particular description because there was nothing particular about him to describe. Average height, average build, brown hair cut short, a face that would disappear in any crowd because it belonged everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. He wore a clean Health Star medical supply uniform pressed and tucked, and he held a cattle prod in his right hand, the way a conductor holds a baton casually as an extension of his authority. Glenn Mercer. He turned toward the broken door with an expression that was not fear or surprise, but irritation. The expression of a man whose schedule has been disrupted by an inconvenience he did not anticipate. Well, he said, his voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone who has rehearsed this scenario in his mind and concluded that it could be managed. This is unexpected. Colt did not look at Glenn. His eyes were on Norah. Birdie is safe, he said. The words came out steady and clear, cutting through the stale air of the building like a blade through cloth. Your daughter is safe. She is with your sister Jolene in Williams. She is unharmed. The transformation that occurred on Norah's face was something Colt would carry with him for the rest of his life. The hard mask of defiance cracked, and beneath it was a mother's love so raw and overwhelming that it seemed to fill the entire room. Her eyes, the one that could still open fully, and the one that was swollen nearly shut, both filled with tears that spilled down her bruised cheeks in tracks that cleared paths through the dried blood. My Birdie, she whispered. My baby girl. Step away from the cages, Vaughn said. His voice had dropped into the register he used in combat. Low-controlled, carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who has given orders in situations where disobedience meant death. Step away and put that thing down. Glenn Mercer did not step away. Instead, he smiled. It was a small smile, almost polite, and it was more frightening than any display of rage could have been, because it suggested that Glenn Mercer was not a man who operated on emotion. He operated on calculation. Every action he had taken, from selecting his victims to choosing this abandoned mine to building these cages, had been the product of careful, systematic thought. And right now, behind that polite smile, he was calculating. I do not think you understand the situation, Glenn said conversationally. You are trespassing on private property. I could call law enforcement right now and have you arrested. 2 men with criminal records, and yes, I do my research, breaking into a building that does not belong to them. How do you think that plays? Vaughn took a step forward. Colt moved to the left, creating 2 angles of approach. It was unconscious, automatic, the geometry of combat applied to a processing plant in an abandoned mine. Glenn's eyes tracked the movement. He was calculating distances, measuring response times. The cattle prod hummed faintly in his hand, charged and ready. There is something else you should know, Glenn continued, and his free hand drifted toward his pants pocket with deliberate slowness. This building is wired. I installed the system myself, plastic explosive commercial grade, connected to a remote trigger that I carry at all times. He paused to let the words settle. Insurance, he explained. If I could not control my inventory, I was not going to let anyone else have it. One press in this building becomes a crater. Everyone in it, including your precious Norah, becomes a memory. From her cage, Tessa made a sound that was not quite a whimper, but something close. Colleen pressed her face against the bars. Bethany closed her eyes. The fear in the room was a living thing pressing against the walls and ceiling. Norah did not make a sound. Her eyes moved from Glenn to Colt to Vaughn and back to Glenn, and Colt could see her mind working behind those battered features. She was reading the room the way she read a trauma bay, assessing, prioritizing, looking for the variable that could be exploited. Glenn, Colt said, and he forced every ounce of tension from his voice, replacing it with the slow, reasonable cadence of a man discussing the weather. You are a practical man. I can see that. Everything you have built here, it is organized, efficient. You do not leave things to chance. Glenn's smile widened slightly. He was enjoying the recognition. So here is what I am offering, Colt continued. You walk out of this building right now. Get in your van. Drive away. We will not stop you. You get a head start before anyone else arrives. Vaughn's eyes cut to Colt, sharp and questioning. But Colt kept his focus on Glenn, watching the way the man's weight shifted, watching his hands, watching the muscles in his forearm that controlled the grip on the cattle prod. "Why would you let me go?" Glenn asked. "Because these women's lives are worth more to me than catching you." Colt took a deliberate half-step backward, opening the path to the door. "I do not care about justice. I do not care about putting you in handcuffs. I care about getting these women out of here alive. You have already lost this location. Your operation here is finished regardless. Cut your losses. Take the van, disappear." For a long suspended moment, Glenn seemed to consider it. His eyes moved to the door, calculating the distance, the angle, the probability of making it to the van before anything could stop him. His hand hovered near his pocket but did not enter it. And that was when Vaughn saw it. The hand. The one near the pocket. It was trembling. Not with cold, not with adrenaline. Trembling with the specific involuntary oscillation of a man running a bluff he is not sure will hold. Sweat had formed on Glenn's upper lip despite the cold air, and his pupils were dilated beyond what the dim lighting would account for. There was no trigger in that pocket. There was no bomb in this building. Glenn Mercer had spent 2 years relying on isolation and secrecy to protect his operation. He had never needed explosives because he had never expected to be found. The bomb threat was improvisation, a final gamble by a man whose carefully constructed system was collapsing around him. Vaughn moved. The distance between them was approximately 15 feet. Vaughn covered it in less than 2 seconds, launching from a standing position into a full sprint that ended with a tackle that drove Glenn backward off his feet. The cattle prod flew from Glenn's hand and skittered across the concrete floor. Both men hit the ground hard, Glenn's head striking the surface with a sound like a coconut dropped on pavement. Colt was there in the same heartbeat. He seized Glenn's wrist and wrenched his hand from his pocket. The hand came out empty. No trigger, no device, nothing but a ring of keys and a cell phone. Glenn's eyes were glassy from the impact, but the smile was gone. In its place was something Colt had seen before on the faces of men in desert towns who had been caught in the open without cover. Naked animal fear. Vaughn pinned Glenn flat and used his own belt to bind the man's wrist behind his back. He cinched the leather tight enough to make Glenn gasp. "You are going to want to hold really still," Vaughn said, and his voice carried the quiet promise of a man who had spent years in places where quiet promises were kept with absolute fidelity. Colt grabbed the keys from the floor and ran to Norah's cage. His hands were shaking and he could not stop them, so he let them shake and worked through it, trying key after key until the padlock clicked open and the cage door swung wide. Norah crawled out. She could not stand fully, her ribs would not allow it, and her legs had been cramped in the cage for too long. Colt caught her as she emerged, supporting her weight against his side, and for a moment she leaned into him with the total surrender of someone who has been carrying an impossible load and has finally found a place to set it down. Then she straightened, because Norah Winslow was not a woman who stayed down. "The others," she said, "get them out." Colt moved to Tessa's cage and worked the lock. Vaughn kept Glenn pinned with one knee while pulling out his phone to call 911. One by one, the locks opened and the women emerged. Tessa first, her legs buckling as she tried to stand. Colleen next, weeping silently, her arms wrapped around herself. Bethany last, moving slowly, blinking at the light as if she had forgotten what open space looked like. 4 women, freed from cages in an abandoned mine because an 8-year-old girl had refused to accept the world's answer, and 2 men had remembered what it meant to keep a promise. Norah moved among the other women, checking their conditions with the practiced efficiency of a nurse, even though she was in worse shape than most of them. She checked Bethany's pulse, examined Tessa's eyes for signs of concussion, made Colleen drink water from the jug in her cage. She worked with a focus that bordered on ferocious, as if caring for others was the mechanism that kept her own body from shutting down. Vaughn's 911 call connected, and he relayed their position and the situation in the clipped, precise language of a military field report. Within minutes, the sound of distant sirens began to thread through the mountain air, faint at first, then growing, building, multiplying. The first vehicle to reach the clearing was an unmarked sedan, moving fast on the dirt road, its suspension bottoming out on the ruts. Decker Rollins emerged before the car fully stopped, his weapon drawn, his face carrying an expression that was equal parts relief and fury. He took one look in the scene. Glenn Mercer on the floor, bound and bleeding from the back of his head. 4 women standing or sitting in various states of shock and injury. Colt and Vaughn still breathing hard, standing between the freed women and the man who had caged them. Decker holstered his weapon and grabbed Colt by the shoulders. "You crazy, reckless, magnificent son of a gun," Decker said. Then he let go and started barking into his radio, coordinating the response that was streaming up the mountain behind him. Within 15 minutes, the clearing was transformed. FBI tactical vehicles rolled in, first agents in body armor, fanning out to secure the building and the surrounding structures. Paramedics arrived next, 3 ambulances that had been staged in Prescott redirected to the mine site. Crime scene technicians began photographing and cataloging everything. The stolen medical supplies on the shelves, the cages, the cattle prod, the packaging materials. Glenn Mercer was transferred from Vaughn's belt restraint to FBI-issue handcuffs and placed in the back of a federal vehicle. He had not spoken since Vaughn tackled him. The calculating calm had drained from his face, replaced by something blank and diminished. Without his carefully controlled environment, without the isolation and secrecy that had been his primary weapons, he was exactly what he appeared to be. A small man in a pressed uniform who had built a kingdom of suffering in a place no one remembered existed. But as they loaded him into the vehicle, Glenn turned his head and looked directly at Colt. The blank expression cracked and something ugly surfaced beneath it. Not fear anymore. Something worse. "You think this is over?" Glenn said. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. "I am the hands, but the brain is still at the hospital, still signing orders, still choosing the next one. You saved these 4. How long till he builds a new operation? How long until the next nurse does not come home?" Then Glenn smiled, the same polite, empty smile he had worn when they first burst through the door. "Shut your mouth," Decker said, and closed the vehicle door. But the words had done their work. They landed in the clearing like stones dropped into still water, and the ripples spread outward until they reached every ear. Agent Deering, a compact woman in her 40s with short silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, approached Colt and Vaughn. She had been directing the operation from behind one of the tactical vehicles, and now she crossed the clearing with the purposeful stride of someone who had just heard something that changed the shape of her investigation. "The suspect referenced someone at the hospital," she said. "Do either of you know what he is talking about?" Colt told her everything. The medication discrepancies Norah had discovered, the fraudulent signatures, Dr. Warren Price, the pattern of selecting vulnerable nurses as targets, the warning note left on Norah's windshield. Deering listened without interruption, her expression neutral, but her eyes intensifying with each detail. When Colt finished, she was already on her phone, speaking in low, rapid tones that carried authority even at a whisper. But it was Norah who delivered the final piece. The paramedics had stabilized her on a stretcher, starting an IV for dehydration and immobilizing her ribs with a compression wrap. She was pale and shaking with pain. But when Agent Deering approached her, Norah pushed herself up on one elbow and spoke with a clarity that cut through the chaos like a knife through paper. "I have the evidence to prove everything Norah said. Every fraudulent medication record, every forged signature, dates, quantities, patient chart numbers that do not match. I copied it all onto a USB drive before he took me." "Where is the drive?" Deering asked. "In my daughter's stuffed bear, a brown bear named Bear Bear. It is on her bed in our house in Williams. I opened a seam in the back and stitched the drive inside. Nobody would think to look there. Nobody would touch a child's toy." Deering stared at her for a long moment. Then something that might have been admiration crossed her features. "You hid federal evidence inside a stuffed animal." "I hid my daughter's future inside the safest place I could think of," Norah corrected. "And I need someone to call her. I need someone to tell Birdie to look inside Bear Bear." Deering made the call herself, speaking directly to Jolene at the Desert Rose Motel. She explained what was needed and asked Jolene to put Birdie on the phone. "Birdie," Deering said, and her voice softened in a way that surprised everyone who heard it. "Your mama needs you to do something very important. Can you go to your room and find Bear Bear?" Through the phone speaker, amplified by the mountain silence, Birdie's voice came through. Small but steady. "Ready. I know where Bear Bear is. He is on my pillow. He is always on my pillow." There was a pause. The sound of small feet on carpet. A door opening. Then Birdie's voice again. "I have him. Your mama says there is something inside Bear Bear. A small device like a thumb drive. She sewed it into his back. Can you feel along the seam for a spot that feels different?" Silence. Then a sound that might have been a seam giving way under small, determined fingers. "I found it," Birdie said. "There is a little thing inside. It is silver, like a little stick." "That is exactly right," Deering said. "Birdie, you just found the most important piece of evidence in this entire case. I need you to give it to your Aunt Jolene, and I need both of you to stay right where you are. Someone from my team will be there within the hour to collect it." Norah heard the exchange from the stretcher. The tears that she had held back through the cage, through the beating, through the endless hours of captivity and uncertainty, finally broke free. Not tears of pain or fear, but tears of a specific luminous relief that belongs only to mothers who have been separated from their children and told that the separation is over. My girl, Norah whispered, my brave, brave girl. The drive south to Williams took the ambulance over an hour on the winding mountain roads. Colt and Vaughn followed on their bikes, having declined all suggestions that they wait for transport. The morning had fully broken now, the sun climbing above the tree line and flooding the forest with amber light that turned the pine needles to copper and made the remaining patches of morning mist glow like something from a painting. Decker had arranged for Norah to be taken to Williams Medical Center rather than the larger hospital in Prescott. It was closer to where Birdie was waiting, and both Norah and the paramedics agreed that reuniting mother and daughter was a medical necessity as urgent as any of her physical injuries. The news traveled faster than the ambulance. By the time they reached Williams, a small crowd had gathered outside the medical center. Word had spread through the town the way it does in small communities, where everyone knows everyone and secrets are as rare as rain. The waitress from Rosie's Diner was there. Edna Hadley, the neighbor who had kept Birdie overnight, was there. Father Brennan stood near the entrance with his hands clasped and his lips moving in silent prayer. And Birdie was there. She stood at the edge of the parking lot with Jolene's hand on her shoulder. Wearing the same clothes she had worn for 2 days, her hair uncombed, her face carrying the marks of exhaustion and tears, and a night spent waiting for a dawn she was not sure would come. But her eyes were fixed on the road with an intensity that could have burned through steel. The ambulance turned into the parking lot. Its lights were on, but the siren was silent. It rolled to a stop near the emergency entrance, and the rear doors opened, and 2 paramedics stepped out and lowered the stretcher with careful, practiced movements. Norah was sitting up. She had insisted on it. Her face was a landscape of bruises and bandages, her left arm strapped against her torso to immobilize her ribs, an IV line running from her right hand to a bag of saline that one of the paramedics held aloft. She looked like a woman who had been through a war, because she had been through a war, one that no one had known was being waged, until a little girl walked into a diner with $10 and the courage to ask for help. The moment Birdie saw her mother, the world stopped, not metaphorically. For Birdie Winslow, in that fraction of a second between seeing and reaching, every other sound and sight and sensation fell away. The crowd disappeared. The medical center disappeared. The parking lot, the ambulance, the morning sun, all of it dissolved into irrelevance, and there was nothing in the universe except the face of the woman who had made her pancakes at 5 in the morning and read her stories at night and given her the bigger room and the bigger piece of chicken and carried her on her back through the Grand Canyon and held her when she was scared and never, not once, not ever failed to come home. Until now. Until the one time she did not come home and her daughter had gone out into the world and brought her back. Mama. The word came out as a whisper, first barely audible. A sound meant only for the space between them. Then again louder, breaking free from the restraint that fear had imposed. Mama. Birdie tore free from Jolene's grasp and ran. She ran with no thought for form or efficiency, just pure, uncontained velocity driven by a force stronger than any muscle. Her sneakers slapped the pavement. Her arms pumped. Her face was contorted with an emotion so large it could not be contained by any expression the human face was designed to make. Norah saw her coming and opened her arms. She should not have. Her ribs were broken. Every movement sent jagged bolts of pain through her torso. The paramedic closest to her reached out instinctively, concerned that the impact would cause further injury. But there are forces in this world that override pain, override medical protocols, override the reasonable objections of trained professionals. The force that pulled Norah's arms open was one of them. Birdie reached the stretcher and launched herself upward with the fearless certainty of a child who knows absolutely and without question that she will be caught. Norah caught her. The impact drew a sharp gasp from Norah as her broken ribs registered their protest in a language of white-hot agony. But her arms closed around her daughter and held on, and the gasp became a song, and the sob became a sound that had no name because it existed outside the vocabulary of normal human experience. It was the sound of a mother reclaiming the things she would have died to protect. My Birdie, oh my baby, I am here. Mama is right here. Birdie burrowed into her mother's neck, her small body shaking, her hands fisting the fabric of the hospital gown someone had put on Norah during the ambulance ride. The words she spoke were muffled, but the paramedics and the crowd and Colt and Vaughn and everyone within earshot heard them, and they would not forget them. I knew you would come back. I knew you would not leave me. And Colt and Vaughn, they promised they would find you, and they kept their promise, Mama. They kept it. Norah looked over Birdie's head. Her eyes, one clear and one still, swollen nearly shut, found Colt and Vaughn standing at the edge of the parking lot. They had hung back, giving the moment to the people it belonged to, standing beside their motorcycles in their worn leather and faded ink, two men who the world had judged and dismissed and underestimated for most of their adult lives. Norah's lips moved. No sound came out, but Colt could read the words as clearly as if she had shouted them across the distance. Thank you. They took Norah inside. The doctors confirmed what the paramedics had assessed. 2 fractured ribs, a mild concussion, severe dehydration, multiple contusions, and a laceration above her right eye that required stitches. Painful and serious, but nothing that would not heal. The deepest wounds, the ones that did not show on x-rays, those would take longer. But Norah Winslow was alive and she was holding her daughter, and for the moment, that was the only medical fact that mattered. While the doctors worked, Agent Deering arrived in Williams with a team that included a forensic analyst specializing in digital evidence. The USB drive that Birdie had extracted from Bear was placed in a sealed evidence bag and transported to the FBI field office in Flagstaff under chain of custody protocols that would make it admissible in federal court. That afternoon, Deering called Colt with an update. The drive contained everything Norah said it would. Deering reported medication logs spanning 8 months showing systematic diversion of controlled substances. Every record carries the electronic signature of Dr. Warren Price. We also found the second manifest, the one showing deliveries to an address that does not correspond to any medical facility. That address is the Copper Ridge Mine. Your friend Norah did not just collect evidence. She built a prosecutable case. Deering paused. We arrested Price 30 minutes ago. Took him from the hospital in handcuffs right off the floor of the emergency department. He was in the middle of his rounds, did not even have time to take off his stethoscope. The arrest of Dr. Warren Price would eventually lead to the dismantling of a trafficking and pharmaceutical theft network that operated across 3 states. 12 additional suspects would be identified and arrested over the following months. The stolen medications and equipment would be valued at over $4 million, and the investigation would prompt a nationwide review of hospital security protocols around pharmaceutical inventory and personnel screening for contracted vendors. But all of that was in the future. In the present, in the late afternoon light of a small hospital in Williams, Arizona, there was only this. Norah Winslow, propped up in a hospital bed with her daughter curled against her uninjured side, asked to speak with Colt and Vaughn. They came in and stood at the foot of the bed, 2 big men in a small room looking awkward and out of place in any setting that was not a highway or a diner or the open sky. Jolene sat in the corner chair, watching with eyes that had not stopped leaking tears since her sister had been wheeled through the emergency entrance. Father Brennan stood by the window, his hands still clasped, his prayers apparently ongoing. I do not have the words, Norah said. Her voice was hoarse, ravaged by dehydration and screaming and 2 days of captivity. But underneath the damage, it was strong. You saved my life. You saved 4 lives. You did it because my daughter walked up to you in a diner and asked for help. And instead of looking away, instead of telling her to wait, instead of deciding it was not your problem, you stood up. Your daughter saved you, Colt said. Everything we did, every step of this, she led us there. She was the one who insisted on searching the route you take home. She was the one who recognized the rest area. She was the one who found the license plate number in your purse. She is the reason we are standing here. Norah looked down at Birdie, who had not relinquished her grip on her mother's hand since the parking lot. She is her mother's daughter, Jolene said from the corner. Norah reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She opened it, and the silver cross on its chain slid into her palm, catching the light from the window and throwing a small bright star onto the wall. This was my mother's, Norah said. She gave it to me the day I left West Virginia. She put it around my neck in the driveway of the house I grew up in, and she told me it would protect me wherever I went. She held the cross up, watching it turn slowly on its chain. It did not stop me from being taken, but it helped me get Tessa to that phone. I bent the chain into a hook and used it to drag the charging cable close enough for Tessa to reach. So maybe it did protect me, just not the way my mother expected. She held the cross out to Colt. I want you to have this. Both of you. Share it or give it to someone who needs protecting more than I do right now. but take it, please. It is the most valuable thing I own, and you gave me back the most valuable thing in the world." Colt accepted the cross with hands that had not been steady for 2 days and were not about to start now. The silver was warm from Nora's palm, and it weighed almost nothing, and it meant almost everything. "If you are ever in Phoenix," Nora said, and her voice broke slightly before she steadied it, "you come find us. Birdie will want to see the men who brought her mama home." "We are not heroes," Vaughn said quietly. Birdie lifted her head from her mother's side. Her face was puffy and streaked and exhausted and absolutely luminous. "Yes, you are," she said. "Heroes are people who help when nobody else will. People who look at someone in trouble and do something about it instead of walking away. That is exactly what you did." She reached into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out the $10 bill. It was more crumpled than ever, softened to the texture of cloth from being held and folded and pressed against a child's heart through the longest night of her life. She held it out to Colt. "I changed my mind about this," she said. "I do not want it back. I want you to keep it, not as payment, as a reminder that sometimes when you ask for help, people answer, and sometimes the scariest looking people in the room turn out to be the best ones." She pressed the bill into Colt's hand and closed his fingers around it. Colt looked at the bill, at Birdie, at Norah, at Vaughn, whose eyes were suspiciously bright and whose jaw was clenched in the specific way it clenched when he was fighting to maintain composure. He tucked the bill into the inner pocket of his vest right next to the silver cross. It sat there against his chest, $10 of paper currency, and a piece of silver jewelry, objects that were worth almost nothing by any material standard, and worth more than he could calculate by any other. An hour later, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Colt and Vaughn walked out of Williams Medical Center and crossed the parking lot to their bikes. The machines sat side by side in the golden light, chrome-gleaming leather seats warm from the afternoon. They looked the way they always looked, like freedom, like possibility, like the open road and everything it promised. Colt swung his leg over his Harley and sat for a moment without starting the engine. The parking lot was quiet. A bird sang somewhere in the trees beyond the fence. The wind chimes on a nearby porch played their soft, random melody. Vaughn mounted his own bike and looked at Colt across the space between them, where, too, the question carried a weight that went beyond geography. They had ridden together for 15 years, covering thousands of miles across dozens of states, always moving, always searching for something they could not name and had begun to suspect did not exist. Peace, purpose, a reason to stop running. And now, in the span of 48 hours, a child with $10 and the courage to ask for help had given them all of it. "California," Colt said. The word came out solid and certain without hesitation. "I need to see my daughter, need to show up at her door and tell her I am sorry for every year I was not there. Need to try to be the father she deserved, even if I am 15 years late." Vaughn grinned, and the gap between his teeth caught the light. "Took you long enough to figure that out." "Had a good teacher," Colt said, thinking of Birdie's fierce little face, of Norah's arms opening despite broken ribs, of the way love, real love, the kind that does not flinch and does not calculate and does not wait for permission, can crack open even the most armored heart. He started his engine. The rumble filled the parking lot, echoed off the medical center walls, and rolled out into the Arizona evening like a declaration. Vaughn started his own engine a heartbeat later, and the two machines idled side by side, their chrome mirrors reflecting the sunset back at the sky. They pulled out of the parking lot and turned west onto Route 66. The old highway stretched before them, a ribbon of faded asphalt lined with vintage signs and memories, and the accumulated dreams of a century of travelers who had come this way looking for something better. The sun hung low ahead of them, flooding the desert with copper light and casting their shadows long behind them on the warm pavement. But everything else had changed. Colt Hargrove rode west with a crumpled $10 bill and a silver cross in his vest pocket, both of them resting against his heart. He rode toward his daughter, toward the terrifying possibility of forgiveness, toward the chance to prove that it is never too late to become the person you were supposed to be. And beside him, Vaughn Oakes rode toward his own reckoning, his own daughter, his own chance to close the distance that war and pain and years of running had carved between him and the people who mattered most. Behind them, in a hospital room in Williams, Birdie Winslow lay curled against her mother's side, listening to the steady rhythm of Nora's heartbeat, the sound that had been her first lullaby and would always be the most beautiful music in the world. Nora's arm was wrapped around her, careful of the IV line, but firm in its hold, and her lips rested against the top of Birdie's head, whispering words that were too soft for anyone else to hear, but that Birdie would remember for the rest of her life. The nightmare was over. The healing had begun. And somewhere on Route 66, two motorcycles rumbled toward the setting sun, carrying two men who had been judged by their leather and ink and scars, who had been crossed streets to avoid and denied service, and watched with suspicion by a world that saw only the surface. Two men who had found in the span of 2 days, in one extraordinary child, the thing they had been searching for across 15 years and 100,000 miles of open road. Not freedom. They had always been free. Not peace. Peace was a destination they would reach in their own time. What they had found was simpler and more powerful than either of those things. They had found that they were still capable of being exactly who someone needed them to be in exactly the moment it mattered most. And that capability, that willingness to answer when a small voice asked for help, was worth more than all the miles they had ever ridden and all the miles that still lay ahead. The engines roared, the sun descended. The desert stretched out around them in every direction, vast and ancient and patient. But the road was warm beneath their wheels, and the sky was ablaze with color, and somewhere behind them, little girl was sleeping safely in her mother's arms. And in Colt Hargrove's vest pocket, a crumpled $10 bill rested against a silver cross, twin tokens of a truth that the world keeps forgetting and that children keep reminding us of. That courage does not require size or strength or weapons. That love does not calculate the odds before it acts. That sometimes the people who look the most frightening are the ones with the most room in their hearts. And that $10 given freely by a child who had nothing else can be worth more than all the gold in the world.